says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Joining me to preview all of the round 11 action for big road trip to Canberra is my good mate Sixties. It's a triple header on Saturday, big fella, and we're out at the Leagues Club. But how are you holding up as we get into the preparatory sort of phase of the podcasting?
Mate, it's been a big week on the Cumberland Throw with content. We've got, as you mentioned, we've got this podcast that we're doing right now. We've got our appearance at Parramatta Leagues Club for people that want to watch the game in the company of fellow supporters in Jack's Bar and Grill. Come and join us. We'll start the preview at 7 o'clock and we'll hit the preview, switch to the big screen for the match, then do our instant reaction straight after. So looking forward to seeing more of you there this week. And big news that we probably need to start off with in this preview podcast, mate.
Yeah, and we'll probably end up discussing with Clint in the NRL News podcast next week, but just a heads up now, the Eels have had some action in both the NRLW and NRL squads today and yesterday. Starting with the ladies in the NRLW 60s, we had a pair of signings, or one was a re-signing. Cassie Tohihiku, if you were watching the City vs Country game, was very sharp at fullback. She's re-signed with the Parramatta Eels, alongside a newcomer in Mahalia Murphy, who I believe can play centre but also a few other positions, so a bit of positional flexibility there. But very, very exciting stuff there for the NRLW.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Mahalia is a Western Sydney girl, went to Hills Sports High as a teenager.
And has repped Aussie Rugby Sevens, Wallaroos and Gillaroos. She brings some real extensive representative quality to the Parramatta Eels.
Yeah, and Cassie was playing on the wing with us last year, but we saw from her performance at fullback that the Eels might just have their fullback for the coming season. So we were wondering what was in store in that key spine position. Well, I think we've just seen what the plans may just be for this year. So, mate, but as we also know, there's big NRL news.
Yeah, Eels have moved to lock down one of their breakout players of the 2023 season, Jermaine Hopgood. It's just a one-year extension on his current deal, but it sees him locked up in the blue and gold to the end of 2025. Very nice move there. Eels been on the front foot with one of their best players this year and one of the real young players to help build around for this team.
Well, we couldn't have a repeat of what happened with Ice, where he had that breakout season with us. And because he was only on a 2-year deal, he became other clubs were able to negotiate with him from November. And after his first year, and lo and behold, he's 1 year with us, and then we learn he's going to be off to another club in the Tigers at the end of his second year. So this does cut that likelihood of that happening around Jermaine. And gives a chance for both parties to become a little bit more settled for negotiating any further deals with the club. So rather than having to rush into anything, I think it's a good deal for both parties to have an extra year locked in, settle in, find out what each party likes about each other, and then move into securing maybe something a little bit longer term. But a 3-year, it effectively means he's now here on a 3-year deal if we factor it in as an extension on his current deal, and that's a good length contract in this day in the NRL. So, mate, but before we get into our preview, a huge thanks to our sponsors, that being Big Swing Golf at Northmead and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Without their support, basically a lot of what happens on the Cumberland Throw would not happen. So our thanks to them, and let's launch into the preview.
Yeah, let's get into it. All 3 grades on the road to the nation's capital, Flegg, Cup and NRL playing the Canberra Raiders this week, 60s. It's a big road trip for many reasons now. So let's start with the Flegg. They're coming off their second bye, which is the second, I think, competition-wide mandated bye. And they're coming off that with some serious reinforcements this week. Let's go through the team very quickly. At fullback, Lindsay Munro. On the wings, Matthew Komalafi. And one of the young guns, Richard Penisini, younger brother of Will. He makes his Flegg debut. In the centres, we've got Terrell Williams and Samuel Luizu. In the halves, Mac Pafisi moves to 5'8" because Ethan Sanders is back in Flegg, the second of 5 of the SG Ball premiers promoted to this grade. In the front row, Noah Reid and Jonte Junior Beffin-Meza are the bookends. Jacob Davis is a starting dummy half. Jock Brazel will captain the team on the left edge. Will Latu moves from the backs to the right edge. And then Saxon Pryke, another member of that SG Board Premier team, and another already graded Flegg player alongside Sanders. He'll start at lock forward. On the interchange, Ned Hicks, Nick Alrafor, Sam Tuivasa, the fourth SG ball player, and Lachlan Mears-Crabbe. And the fifth and final SG ball player to get a look in the Flegg this week is playing as the 18th man, and that's Lance Fualima. Taking on the Raiders for the second time this season, 60s, where they lost in round 1, 20-14, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Sorry.
I was going to say, since then it's been some, I wouldn't say contrasting fortunes, because it's not like the Eels have, won every game, but they've been solid since, and they've gone 4-4 total in the season to sit in 6th place, whereas the Raiders have won just one more game since, and now sit in second last in 11th place.
Well, what I will say from that match is that I was left dumbfounded as to how they lost. It was almost how we were feeling last week after the NRL match between the Eels and the Titans. The Flegg team that week seemed, in any way that they could find for something to go wrong, they seemed to find it, even to the extent where we became the first team penalised for holding the ball in the scrum. Mm-hmm. So that will tell you how that match played out. So the Eels looked the far more dangerous team against the Raiders, but as we know in rugby league, results don't always go with the flow of the game, and that was certainly the case then. We now see, as you said, all those elevations from the SG Ball team. And just to mention as well, Richard Penisini is only 18 this year, and Sam Tuivasa is only 18 this year.
You wouldn't know looking at him, but yeah.
both were playing Harold Matts last season.
So in their junior year of SG Ball agility.
Yeah, they could run around in SG Ball again next year, and we did see that being the case with Ethan Sanders, who was elevated to Flegg last year and basically played the entire season in Jersey Flegg, but came back to have his second season of SG Ball before being immediately elevated this week into the Jersey Flegg team. And if we consider that it's only 2 weeks ago that we had that SG Ball Grand Final, and of course there was, as you mentioned, the bye last week in the Jersey Flegg, they've literally been immediate call-ups for the Jersey Flegg team. Now, I want to allay maybe some thoughts that people might have about them being rushed into the team. A large number of the SG Ball squad, and it was somewhere about 8 to 10 players, trained with trained with some of the Jersey Flegg players in the NRL pre-season prior to Christmas. Mm-hmm. And when they weren't training with the NRL team, they were training with the Jersey Flegg team. So there is a lot of familiarity within the group. So these aren't necessarily players that their teammates are unfamiliar with. If they haven't played with them at some stage in the past, they've certainly trained with them for an extended period over the pre-season.
Yeah, so really looking forward to seeing how this new look team jives. And it might, you talked about training together, 60s, given the sort of time lapse in terms of in-season now, it might take them a game or two to get back to full speed, but I expect them to play pretty well together and mesh pretty nicely against the Canberra Raiders. But it is going to be a tough road trip. especially for the Jersey Flegg, because you're not provided with the same resources as the NRL team when it comes to prep and travel for this sort of thing. But they've shown that they can take care of business against pretty good teams this year. So I'm looking forward to, well, we won't be able to see them, unfortunately, because this is not going to be broadcasted. But we'll have to wait to get some feedback on this one, mate. But I am looking forward to seeing how they compete on the big road trip.
Yeah, looking forward to the feedback, being able to watch a bit of vision of the match. And, best of luck, not only to the players that have been doing the job for the Jersey Flegg team so far this season, but also the additions from the SG Ball. And knowing Coach Craig Brennan as we do, he'll have them all gelling very, very quickly in this team.
A couple other players to watch out for in the coming weeks from that SG Ball team include the likes of obviously Matt Arthur and Blaze Talangi 60s, but for differing reasons they're not available for selection this week, I believe. One due to suspension for Buds, and then I think Blaze got a nasty cork out of the City vs Country game. Yeah.
So for anyone that wasn't aware, yes, you had that injury to Blaze, which I think from memory was the first half.
Yeah, I think at the end of essentially the first quarter, 20-ish minutes in, he ended up dropping off the field. Sorry.
Yeah, and also young Buds, he copped a 2 week suspension for a crusher tackle in the grand final. Look, I don't think there was too much in it, but they are pretty harsh on anything where there's a bit of pressure on the neck, and evidently it wasn't worth the while to challenge that. So Buds has a couple of weeks out from the game, but no doubt will come into contention for a Flegg dummy half role in the not too distant future.
And that brings us to the second of the three fixtures out at GIO Stadium. This one kicking off at 5:20 p.m. The 5th place Raiders hosting the 7th place Eels, so this is a top 8 affair. Again, the Raiders got the Eels in round 1 when these two teams first met. I think it was 16-10 in this one, 60s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Another dour and not necessarily aesthetic game for the spectators on the sidelines, including yourself. But a different looking team this time around, 60s. Walk me through what happened in round 1.
Well, in round 1, it was, if you remember, we were struggling to win a game in any grade in round 1. And the Eels, it was again a matter of just completions, errors at the wrong time. Interestingly, running around for the Raiders in that round match was Jared Croker.
Mm-hmm. And it turns out he's in decent touch.
Yes, it has since certainly turned out that he's in decent touch. But again, it was a match that you're left scratching your head thinking, how have we let this get away? And it was frustrating on the sidelines. It was the double header there where, unfortunately, we had both the Jersey Flegg and the New South Wales Cup teams losing what was very winnable matches. So and look, there's going to be a challenge for the team this week, as you're about to run through with the team list. There's changes and a big one too with the elevation of Jake Arthur.
Yeah. No Mitchell Moses in NRL means no Jake Arthur in New South Wales Cup. So we start at fullback where Dejan Arce will hold down the number 1. Isaac Lumi and Chris Tupou are on the flanks. Sean Russell and Zach Senior in the centres. In the halves, well, Jordan Rankin, he's going to be the halfback this week. No real surprises there, 60s, but his partner, Jaden Yates, probably not the player I would have tipped initially, but knowing Yates, he's going to do a really solid job and give his everything to the task. In the front row, off Hickey Ogden, hopefully he can continue a rich run of form now. It's been a couple of really strong games for him, and he'll be working alongside Jira Momasia. Manny Luke is the dummy half. In the back row, Matt Dury and Dan Keir, who returns. They're going to be on the edges. Luca Moretti is the lock forward. On the interchange, Tony Matelli, Tavita Taumapenu. Good to see Kai Rodwell back. He's been out for a couple of weeks. Well, I don't know if it's injury or suspension. And then Nick Lanars is a very worthy promotion from the Jersey Flegg. He's going to be the lock/dummy half utility. And, he's been in really good touch in Jersey Flegg, and no surprise to see him caught up for this game, big fella.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're obviously big fans of Nick. He's he's one of those players that just rips in both sides of the game, isn't he? You know, whether he's defending or whether he's doing hit ups if he's playing at lock, or just getting so busy at that dummy half role if he's required to fill in there. What we've seen in Jersey Flegg is that he starts the game at lock and then would go to dummy half when the dummy half is rested. So it's that being Jacob Davis. So we've seen him in that utility role, but he's obviously coming off the bench, and they have that option about whether they want to give Manny Luke a bit of a rest or not. And if they decide to play him for the 80 minutes of the game, then of course Nick could be used, as we said, as that lock or back row sort of position. So congratulations to him on the call up. It's always good to see Pathways players progress into the senior grades. So but mate, how they will play Jaden Yates remains to be seen. Like, you have to think to yourself that Dejan Arce might come up and do a little bit more ball play.
Yeah.
Then fullbacks these days are an extension of the halves, but you have to think that, of course, when Jaden was younger, he did play quite a bit of football around the halves, but especially at club level. But it's been a while since he's. Oh, look, I shouldn't say that, because he has also filled in at training over the pre-season in that role in the opposed work. So he's been in and around there. And I guess if you have as many receipts of the ball, or you handle the ball as much as you do at dummy half, that you've got some fair passing skills there. But it's that extra game management, isn't it, that's required of the halves position. So I suspect Dejan will probably step into the breach there.
Yep. And given that there's no Jake, Yates, Arce and Rankin have to combine and sort of filling in the gap with the aggregate of work there. And they're taking on a Raiders team. There's some surprising names in this one, mate. Xavier Savage, Harvey Smith-Shields, another good young outside back in the nation's capital there. Trey Mooney, again, sort of plying his trade in reserve grade as the captain. Can't quite crack that NRL team. And then Corey Harawira Naira. So, and then you got the young gun Chevy Stewart on the interchange. No surprise to seeing him back in New South Wales Cup. 60s, he was on a very meteoric rise prior to the SG Ball Grand Final qualifier, where they called him back against the Eels, only to get done in a very, very good game. But
now we don't follow the Raiders closely enough to maybe make a decent call on this, but I'm a bit confused as to why Corey Harawira Naira is playing New South Wales
Xavier
Cup.
Savage, Harawira Naira, even Harley Smith-Shields. I mean, I know you got to have depth in your top 30, but Savage was actually just outright dropped with the return of another back in the NRL team. So,
Albert Hopewadi.
Yeah, Albert Hopewadi, exactly. So I don't know. I don't know if it's what's going on there, because Savage has had a on and off relationship with the Raiders, hasn't he? He's been a very talented young back, but hasn't been able to consistently crack their first grade team.
You'd have to suggest that, given those players that they've got in the team this week, that they will perform quite strongly, this Raiders New South Wales Cup team. They do sit above the Eels on the ladder, only just. But then again, the West Magpies were sitting above the Eels on the New South Wales Cup ladder. So and the Eels just got the job done last week. I think
high scoring affair.
It was a high scoring affair. 32-30. But I'll look at this and I think, it is going to be the challenge for the Eels to play without Jake Arthur, who's, he's not just the halfback. He's probably been their most consistent performer this season. So it's going to be a challenge for him. Of course, there was the newspaper talk as well about Jake being on the radar of some other clubs, and that there may be a move for him at the end of this season to another club. If not, they're even suggesting it might be a mid-season move to another club.
Yeah, if that August 1 deadline.
Yeah, look, I would. I mean, my first thought would be I'd be surprised if BA would allow that to happen mid-season, given the situation that we have this week, where he's required for the head knock to Mitch Moses. I mean, the way things are with the concussion protocols, you cannot predict. I mean, you can't predict any injury, but it can happen in the simplest circumstance these days, can't it? The Category 1 concussion. And as soon as you have that happen, you've got that mandatory 11-day stand down.
Yep.
So you have to have your backup players. And what's the Eels' options outside of Jake Arthur if anything were to happen to Dylan or Mitch?
Yeah, you got obviously you got the manufactured options in the NRL team like Bryce Cartwright or Ryan Madison, I suppose, at a pinch. But after that, you're looking at Dejan Arce, and then beyond that, well, you're looking at a very, very young rookie option probably, which you're just not going to do.
Probably, or you're looking at that. I mean, you mentioned one reshuffle. You could be looking at a reshuffle like Gutho into the halves, and maybe someone like Deja to fullback. But it's those sorts of scenarios aren't ideal. You like to replace like for
That's
like.
Right. And Jake moving on to further his career at the end of the season is a completely different prospect, because the Eels will be able to have half a year of in terms of game time prepping someone like Ethan Sanders or whoever else they need to do. So not expecting the Eels to release Jake mid-season, but wouldn't be surprised to see him move on because this is a real crossroads for his career in terms of finding traction as an NRL or prospective NRL halfback, isn't it?
Well, it is, because once you're looking at the long-term deals that have been signed by Mitch Moses and Dylan Brown, unless Jake's going to be content to be the old-fashioned club stalwart and run around in reserve grade as a halfback for the next half a decade, then, and look, these days no one who aspires to be a professional footballer is likely to do that. Not when, and we know that there are clubs that are making inquiries about Jake's services because there is a dearth of quality halfbacks in the NRL. And so I couldn't see him sticking around, as much as, the fact that BA is his father. He doesn't get any preferential treatment with the Eels. I mean, the Eels have just signed Dylan Brown and Mitch Moses. It's his path to NRL is blocked for years to come. So unless he does, as has been suggested, look at a change of position, and I don't see that on the horizon anytime soon. If that was going to happen, they would have started planning for that already, and he would have been getting game time in other positions.
Yes.
The option is for him to move on as probably as unwilling as he might be, or, I guess this is the tough position for Brad to be in, because he's his coach and he's also his father. So he has to be, if Jake went to him for advice, he has to be giving him the best advice that a father can give, and, take off his coach's hat in that instance. So it's not ideal, and maybe because it's not ideal, who knows, that might be the best option for Jake to pursue. But I think I've made my thoughts on Jake pretty clear in the past. I think he's got that potential to play in other positions. So anyway, we'll see what transpires.
Yes, indeed, and it's going to be a big one for the Eels in this grade. So if they can get the win, it'll shore up their spot inside the top 8 and help them, I think, maybe leapfrog the Canberra Raiders. If I just check out the ladder, they're on equal wins, so they will. But the Raiders both teams have a draw, so they'll just out leapfrog the Canberra Raiders outright by one win if they do get the W on Saturday. And that brings us to the main event, which kicks off at 7:35 p.m. out at GIO Stadium. Be live on Fox and KO.
And of course, the reminder they can come.
Yep.
People can come and join us in Jack's Bar and Grill and in Paraleagues, but we'll be on from 7:00 with the preview.
Yep.
So again, another plug, another reminder that we're on there. And if you don't want to sit at home, or maybe you don't have pay TV, and you'd like to be able to watch the match, you don't want to make the drive down to a cold GIO stadium in Canberra, get in there, join us for a feed, a drink, bit of footy talk, the footy on the big screen. And don't worry, we even when we're doing our chats up there, we keep an eye on the big screen. If there's any interviews with the players or the coach, whatever the case may be, we flick over, get that on the screen for you. So it's a good night there. Come and join us.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the menu, you see a schnitzel for $40 or thereabouts, you gotta know what you're getting into. It's not a normal schnitzel; it's a schnitzel for 2 or 3 people, so you get good value out of it.
Yes, we could recommend that. It was tried by someone at our table last week, and it took 3 people to get through it. So that's we'll recommend the loaded schnitzel there for people that see that.
Very good value for sure.
Yeah.
So let's start with the home team, our opposition this week, 60s. Dramatic 31-30 win against the Dolphins, where they had a missed knock-on in extra time, allowing them to kick the game-winning field goal. Backed that up last week in Magic Round with a very high-scoring affair against the Canterbury Bulldogs. I think it was 34-30 in that one. So they're actually on a 4-game win streak, but their most notable scalp in that streak is the Brisbane Broncos, handing them their lone defeat of the season until this week. But up until then, had been their lone defeat. But yeah, they're beaten up on the Dolphins, the Dogs, and I think the Dragons was the other team in that run there. So it's hard to get a scope on their form because they haven't had the greatest of opposition in all those games, but they've done the job, which means they're by far the form team this week, and they look like this. Sebastian Chris, he's going to be at fullback as he continues that transition from centres to the custodial role. Albert Hopewade is back this week. He'll go on to one wing with Jordan Rapana, the constant Parramatta Eels killer, on the other wing. Jared Croker, already spoke about him, 60s. He's marching towards 300 this year, 300 NRL caps, and he partners Matthew Tomoko in the centres. Jack White and Jamal Fogarty are in the halves. Josh Papali'i spearheads their forward pack alongside the outstanding Joseph Tapane. Zach Wolford's a dummy half. In the back row, you've got Hudson Young, Elliot Whitehead, and Corey Horsburgh, who's in the midst of a massive breakout campaign this year and is probably going to earn NRL State of Origin selection, for the Queensland Maroons in the coming weeks. On the interchange, you've got the live wire Tom Starling, Emre Gula, who just re-signed to the end of 2025, I believe, with the Raiders, Pasami Salo, and Ata Mariota. And then they extended interchange Xavier Savage, Howie Smith-Shields, Corey Harawira Naira, Trey Mooney, and Hohepa Puru, all members of that cup team that's going to be taking place as the curtain raiser. Pretty good team, 60s. Big physical outside backs, really solid forward pack. It almost sounds like our kryptonite right now, given our problems with the collisions.
Yeah, it does. You mentioned before about Jordan Rapana. I've noted in the past that he must surely get out the highlighter and circle the dates of the games against the Parramatta Eels on his calendar, because going all the way back to when we had Semi running around and destroying opposition sides out on the wing, he was owned by Jordan Rapana every time they played. It didn't matter how good Semi was going, Rapana would own him every single time. He just would. Semi would show him a bit of space, to get him to go around his outside, and Rapana would go, "Thank you very much, I'll take that." It was just, it was almost like he reserved some of his best, if not most, annoying football for when he plays the Eels. And I'm always wary of the Raiders, as much for his participation as any other reason. But you're looking at a forward pack which is travelling really, really well at the moment with the Raiders. Look, the other thing I'm concerned about with the Raiders is it seems like every match that they're involved in has some form of controversy. And they're very much swings and roundabouts. they'll either have it go their way in a big way, or it'll go against them in a big way. Like you know that you're going to get the post-match blow up every second week from Ricky,
Yeah.
because something happens. I mean, he's not doing it without cause. I mean, he blows up more than the typical NRL coach will, but he does get some go his way as well. For example, that knock on that was missed
Yeah.
prior, in the lead up to that winning field goal against the Dolphins.
Mum's the word when that's the case. Exactly.
But then last week, I thought they had a number of calls, including the lead up to the last try that the Bulldogs got against them. So, it's. I just hope that we get a match where there is no refereeing controversy, because goodness knows we can do without refereeing controversies, mate.
Well, relying on Grant Atkins and Casey Badger as the two main officials there, one with the on-field ref being Atkins and the box official being Badger. Video box official being Badger. So I don't know, mate. We're might be tough. Might be tough sledding.
Oh yeah. I'm just going to keep the fingers crossed that officiating isn't a factor. That's all I can say. So,
you control what you can only control, 60s, and to do that, the Eels have picked these 17 players. I think it's just the one change actually to the lineup, given that Mitch Moses is a mandatory stand down due to a Category 1 concussion, which, by the way, credit to the Eels for doing the right thing there. But on the flip side, last night with the South Sydney Rabbitohs, the Brisbane Broncos, Adam Reynolds, I know that they're saying it was a neck injury, but he hits the ground and doesn't get up, which shows concussion symptoms, and they call it a Cat 2, so he's available for next week. He didn't move and need to be medicapped off the ground. So, again, the system maybe being gamed a little bit there. The Eels start with their fullback and captain, Quinton Gufferson, Mike Acevo and Hayes Dunster, alongside Will Penisini and Bally Simonson, round out an unchanged back five. In the halves, though, Dylan Brown, who had his best game of the season against the Gold Coast Titans, just couldn't get the Eels home, unfortunately. But he'll partner Jake Arthur. Going to be very interesting to see what the dynamic between those two is. 60s, we'll talk about that shortly. Whether they let Dylan play with the hot hand or let Jake steer the team around and try and find that balance. In the front row, Wiremu Greg continues his, I'm almost willing to call it a breakout campaign now, 60s. I think it's been a month of really good football for him, both as a starter and off the interchange. But he continues that campaign, and he's working alongside Junior Barlow, who we do need to see more of. Need the big fella really fire up this week, up against Papali'i, Tapane, and Horsburgh. Josh Hodgson faces off against his former club. Another player the Eels need to get a bit more out of on both sides of the ball, but especially defensively with those missed tackles. Sean Lang works on the left, Andrew Davey on the right, and the recently re-signed Jermaine Hopgood starts at lock forward. On the interchange, you got Bryce Cartwright, Brennan Hands, Ryan Madison, and Makahesi Makatoa. Extended roster features Sean Russell, Offa Hickey Ogden, Matt Dury, Dejan Arce, and Kai Rodwell. Already mentioned, but the match officials, Atkins with the main whistle. You got Dave Munro and Ziggy Preziklasa Adamski on both the sidelines, with Casey Badger as the video official, or the senior review official, as it's now titled. Road trips to the nation's capital, always difficult for the Eels, 60s, especially when you're not in the greatest of touch.
Yeah, the Eels, it's interesting though, the Eels, I think, have won their last two trips to Canberra and have won the last 5 or 6 games all up against the Raiders. So we've got some good recent form against them, including the shellacking that we delivered in the final series last year. Now, of course, the Raiders are going to be smarting over that. That goes without saying. And being able to get the Eels on their home track for the next encounter is certainly weighs in their favour. I don't see any sort of similar scoreline coming the Eels' way this week. The inclusion of Jake Arthur for Mitch Moses, well, what you're not going to see is Mitch Moses' electrifying pace out of Jake. Now, Jake has passable speed for a halfback. I don't buy into the criticisms that say that he's the slowest halfback in the game. If you watch the way that he's been playing in the New South Wales Cup, he's very much an on the pace player, and he simply has an awkward running style. He's just got that long loping running style, so that people just think that he's running slower than what he is. But he's got passable pace, but he is not in the category of Mitch Moses. There aren't too many halfbacks that have Moses' elite pace. I mean, you've seen that week, when Mitch Moses puts the foot to the floor to go through a gap, he leaves people, grasping at thin air. And there's only a few halfbacks that are capable of that. Dylan Brown's probably capable of that himself, but Mitch Moses is in the elite class, and you've also seen that when he gets in the clear, he'll take on fullbacks and run around them and sprint for corners. That the number of times we've seen him score those sorts of tries, that's what we have with that's one of the assets that Mitch Moses possesses. What Jake Arthur possesses is those game management skills and the fact that he's a competitor. He'll be the player out there on the field who'll be chasing the whole game. If there's a line break made, he'll be one of the ones that's there chasing. You can guarantee it. So we're going to get his game management skills. We're going to get. He's got a very good kicking game. We're going to get that. We're going to get his competitiveness, and we're also going to get his cool demeanour out there. He just doesn't get flustered. So you're not going to get the same type of player, but there are some positives from Jake coming in.
Last NRL start for Jake, Manly last year. He helped spearhead an upset win, given that Mitchell Moses was out in that game too. Worked really nicely for Penisini down that right edge with the short kicks.
Correct. So there was certainly no negatives that came out of that last starting performance for the Eels. But you posed the question before: what's the balance going to be like with Dylan Brown? Is Dylan Brown going to step up to take the lead hand in this? Are they going to have, I suppose, a similar balance to what Brown has with Moses, which is Moses is probably the dominant half, and Dylan Brown plays that sort of running, supporting type of role. Now, I think it's fair to say that last week Dylan Brown massively outplayed the performance of Mitch Moses. Mitch was having a very quiet game by his standards. It just wasn't happening for him. So Dylan did basically everything in his power to carry the Eels to a victory, but it just didn't quite happen. I don't know. I mean, do we want Dylan to change how he plays?
I'm not opposed to Dylan popping up on both sides of the ruck. Just being that threatening ball runner in that sort of almost like pseudo second fullback role, really. Just get him that bit wide in those arrangements to get outside of the half or back row, I suppose, whichever one he feels more comfortable attacking, or even coming back in from the right edge back across the ruck if he can pick off a tiring forward. So I wouldn't mind seeing Dylan more involved in that regard, and I think that he'll help with the fifth tackle kicking more so than he's done in the past, where it's been probably one of the more criticised aspects of his game for good reason. But I think this year he's been a lot tidier and more efficient in that regard, and he can help share load with Jake, who will do the primary long kicking.
Yeah, look, we've seen in New South Wales Cup that Jake will play both sides of the ruck as well. So maybe it's an opportunity for a bit more combination between the halves.
Yep.
As we do know, Mitch will play both sides of the ruck as well. So will their game plan change too much? Maybe not. Maybe not at all. And if the game plan isn't changing too much around what happens with the halves, it comes back to where do we need to have this lift? Now, what we've seen is a passive defence from the Eels far too often or in periods during a game. And you and I have spoken about this, 40. We've seen that they're still effective carrying the ball, but there's been far too much leeway given to the opposition. And when you're on your heels waiting for the attacking team to run at you, you're just giving up too much territory. And the Eels have been quite good with not conceding line breaks this season, and yet at the same time, we're one of the worst in the competition when it comes to missed tackles and ineffective tackles. So we're putting a lot of pressure on our own scramble to keep defence, to keep the attacking teams at bay, but we're still ultimately conceding a lot of points.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like, well, we are. I think we're basically conceding more tries than we are line breaks. So work that out. Work out how that's happening. It's basically happening because we're allowing opposition teams to get the territory and
becoming vulnerable to attacking kicks.
Correct.
Yeah.
So we need to see more from our forwards from that line speed and defensive aggression. I think the old hit and stick, it just doesn't happen, does it? It's like we're bouncing off tackles or falling off tackles too easy. It's like we will see some damage from someone like Wiramu when he decides that he's going to hit someone. They get hurt, but of course he doesn't have that mobility to cover what might be happening on the edge of the ruck. He couldn't be picked out if he's getting back in defence by a fast play the ball. And as we know, the Eels allow fast play the balls.
Mm-hmm.
And this has come up for debate from supporters before, that we're no good at the wrestle, we allow too quick play the balls. Look what happens the moment that we're slightly slower than we are normally. The referees hit the Eels with 6 agains or penalties, even when the play the ball is still fast. It is that the opposition play the ball is still faster than what the Eels are allowed. Like it does my head in. It does my head in. Like you say to people, look, the Eels make a concerted effort to not get penalised and not have 6 agains called against them. Yet the moment there's the slightest slow up in the play the ball speed for an opposition team, referees are straight onto it. As I said, it really does my head in watching that unfold in games. I can't complain that it happens too much, because the Eels' discipline is still so good that they're the second least penalised team in the competition.
And yet, in any given matchup, you're just concerned that we're going to get smashed by the whistle. That's why.
Yes.
And this isn't just like a 2-season to date sort of thing. This is across Brad Arthur's entire tenure as a head coach. He's been very strict on the discipline side of the game, making sure the Eels concede. Don't hand out penalties and flip field position. But instead,
mate, I've been there at pre-season training when he's been drilling that into the team, even when they had the players that were elevated from the Jersey Flegg and SG ball into the training in the prior to Christmas. And he read the riot act about discipline to them and basically said there's no place for them in the NRL in the future if they can't be disciplined in how they play their football. And so, it is drummed into the team about discipline and not giving away silly penalties. I'm sure that it is across all teams, but that it's something that the Eels had to work hard for, because we know how badly penalised teams can be when they sit at the bottom of the table. It's been brought up by coaches time and time again.
we literally just saw the Warriors' principal sponsors CEO blowing up essentially because of it. He's going to get in trouble now because of it.
Yeah,
he's saying the quiet part out loud, but
And the Eels have had to fight and grind their way out of that position for years. It took years. We used to bang on about the penalty counts. I mean, I can remember there was a classic penalty count when we flogged the Broncos, where we put about 50 points on them, but we were still penalised something like 11-2 in that match.
Yeah, same
it
thing
was,
against the Dragons in 2017. I think it was both 2017. We played the Dragons and didn't get our first penalty until like the 70th minute of the game, despite dominating that game.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's just diabolical how it plays out. But anyway, we digress from what we were talking about. We just need to see the defensive line not being so passive. We need to see a bit of aggression in the hits.
Yep.
And like we were winning the middle against the Titans, but that was when we were getting a good run of possession as well. We just have to make sure that we don't give opportunities by giving away simple meters, that we make it a real contest in that middle. And you spoke before that we need to see a bit more out of Junior. And I'm sure he'd be the first to agree that his form has not been what it was last season. And I think, given that we're playing against his former team, I mean, Junior, of course, is an Eels pathways player, but he spent those years down in with the Raiders. He's coming up against a good mate of his in Josh Papali'i, so there'll be something extra in the contest with the two of those players facing off. I'm pretty sure Junior's going to be as switched on as we've seen him all season in this match, and I'll come to that a bit later. Sean Lane has yet to recapture his 2022 form. I think that's fair to say. And really, when you're talking about Dylan Brown, was pretty much lost without him in the early part of the season. They've reunited. Dylan's form has picked up, and I think that's, Sean Lane's presence has a bit to do with that. So we can't be entirely critical of Sean, but we haven't seen his impact. I think his timing just isn't quite there with his runs.
Mm-hmm.
And we see if the timing's not quite right, you don't get as good a handle on the ball. So we've seen a few drops from Sean. He's just a fraction off the pace that he needs to be. So Wiremu, we're only getting about half an hour out of Wiremu. And thankfully, what we do have is Ryan Madison in the sort of form that he's in. So when Maddo's been playing, he's been such a huge asset to the Eels. So he'll get the big minutes, and you'll almost be able to transpose his minutes against that of Wiremu, and you can work out whatever minutes Wiremu doesn't play, that's where Maddo plays. So I think the balance is understandable there. So
sticking with the forward 60s, Davey over Cartwright on that right edge. What's your read on that? It was a mixed bag for Andrew in his sort of club re-debut against the Titans. He ended up bagging that last try that got us right back into the hunt, but had some struggles defensively down a right edge that admittedly got picked on once Gufferson was put in the sin bin.
I think what you saw there was maybe a bit of a lag from where he's been in terms of defence. He fell out of our system in that moment. He overread a play. I think you've got to be trusting the players inside and outside you, that they'll do their role. And I think he fell out of that in that early part of the game. Was I expecting him to be selected so soon in the NRL team? No. Am I surprised that he was selected? No. I'm not. I wasn't surprised because, as I spoke about before, if you make a mid-season signing, you're not signing someone to play reserve grade. And they obviously had him targeted for a reason, wanted to bring him in the back row. We assume from a defensive perspective, but you know what? Andy runs good, strong lines when he's carrying the ball. So, not a surprise there. Cardi's probably playing the best football of his career, and maybe, given how strong he played when he came onto the field last week and how strong he played the week before, maybe BA is warming to him being that impact player off the bench. And, we've seen that he can be a bit more of a workhorse in the early part of the season, but how on song was his passing game last week, let alone the strength of his carries. So, we might be on the verge of seeing Bryson in the best form of his career, certainly the most consistent form.
Yeah,
the player that might be a bit unlucky at the moment is Matt Dury.
Yeah, he's gone back to Reggie's, and he's been physical, and he's had a lot of try involvements, both creating them and scoring them. So he's doing his job, and I think if he continues in that vein, he'll get a look back in at some point. But yeah, it's kind of hard when you've got Ryan Madison, who's in thunderous form. I mean, like top of the competition sort of form. You look at his numbers, and they're so gaudy in both effectiveness and efficiency. And then you got Bryce Cartwright, who's really putting it all together right now in this season, balancing playing tough and physical with some really great deft sleight of hand plays. So yeah, it's the back row stocks really aren't that bad enough, Parramatta, which is funny because you go back to the start of the season and you're really the plural you, including myself, we're all really concerned about how it might shake out, and now suddenly it's the middle forwards because there's no Reg and Junior's not at his best. Where you got big concerns. But Matto's doing a great job alleviating that in his dual roles as an edge and middle, and Wiramu's helping stimmy the bleeding to some degree with the fact that he's playing good football.
Yeah, now we've spoken about, will we see the best from Junior Paulo against his old team? We also have two other players out there that are former Raiders in Josh Hodgson and Bailey Simonson. I liked the form of Bailey Simonson last week.
Yeah.
I liked the form of him at centre.
Yeah, he actually looked good at centre. He was working hard from the ruck, flashed a couple of times with the ball in hand, and I think he was actually pretty good last time the Eels and the Raiders met in Canberra. I think that was a bit of a breakout game for him as a Parramatta Eel.
Yeah, so I don't have any doubt that he will perform again this week. The question mark then becomes around Josh Hodgson, because he has not been able to produce as expected. I had massively high expectations of him after the preseason. I put my hand up. I have rarely seen a preseason of the standard that he produced. And I wasn't on my own, because all the media talk was of the players gushing about what it's going to be like to play alongside Josh Hodgson. And that was based on what they themselves were experiencing in the preseason. He simply hasn't been able to reproduce it in games. And for whatever reason, whether it be that physically he can't reproduce it, whether it be that from a confidence aspect he can't reproduce it. But a lot of the talk now is, has BA got the minutes right in balancing Hodgson and Hands? Should Hands be starting the game and Hodgson come on and provide a bit of impact on either side of half time, and then you get Hands come back on for the end of the game, so he starts and ends the game with Hodgson in between on either side of half time? Should Hodgson be limited minutes at the start of the game before Hands comes on and then stays on? Look, this is interesting, because if we go back to the past, BA like to play Reid Marnie for 80 minutes wherever possible. So what did that mean if he's playing Reid Marnie for 80 minutes? The most obvious thing.
Well,
no interchange.
Yeah, you're saving interchanges, at the cost of vulnerability defensively, but you're saving yourself at least one, maybe two interchanges.
Yep. So this year already you're talking about instances where there is one more interchange around dummy half than had been used in the past. And if you get a scenario where we've had in at least one match, maybe two, where Hodgson comes off, is replaced, and he comes on at the end of the game. You're talking about two interchanges where previously there had been none. So that's a big change in the bench rotation straight away. I mean, that then becomes if he goes for two changes, that means a quarter of the interchange happens around the dummy half position. And that probably flies in the face of what BA might prefer under normal circumstances to do. And we know that BA uses his interchange differently to a number of other coaches, and you haven't always been a fan of how BA has used the bench 40, and a lot of fans are probably even more highly critical of that. But yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting decision for him to make going forward, because I suspect that Brendan Hands could play 80 minutes as he did in a match when Hodgson was unavailable through illness. So have you got any thoughts on that, mate?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because you sign Hodgson to come in and be not the the gear to get the Eels over the hump, but to come in and be the senior playmaker, the steady hand, the experienced vet. And we've said in the past, I don't think that Brendan Hands develops the way he does this year without Josh Hodgson coming to the club and helping him, learn the ropes to be a better / high quality dummy half. So that's a big net positive for the Parramatta Eels. But now we're in a situation where defensively, Hodgson is struggling. He's leading the team in his tackles. We've spoken about that. And just the timing in the way he fits into our offense isn't quite working, is it?
No.
In a way, it almost mirrors the Reid Marnie problem we had with the fact that both Moses and Dylan are ball dominant halves. Even Dylan, who's not the traditional first receiver, he is a ball dominant half. He likes running the ball, being the focal point or the fulcrum for the attacking movement down his edge. Whereas Hodgson is more of a mix-up dummy half, where he'll service his halves, but also likes to get out and work with the forwards and create some opportunities that way. But when you combine that with the fact that he's more than half a step slower now, unfortunately, with the ACL injury sustained last year, whether it's like full-on long-term damage or just that he's inside that window of not being at your best physically, recovering from that ACL, the same way that Hayes is with his issues. It's just not working for him, and he can't engage the defence the way he likes to and create doubt in their minds as to whether he's going to run, whether he's going to pass, whether he's going to kick effectively.
I don't think that we've seen him play his natural game as well. You mentioned there about having ball-dominant halves in Moses and Brown, and you have Josh Hodgson, who is a playmaker dummy half, who, as you said, engages his forwards, who engages the defence to put his forwards through the line. It's almost like there's a slowness in service, because if you watch, Hodgson doesn't so much snap the ball off the ground. He will stand and then maybe take a step or two and then deliver the ball, which is almost like half pie going into his old style of running and engaging defenders before delivering the ball off, which he did at the Raiders. But he's got halves that are demanding the ball as well. So I think he's spoken himself about, got to get his combination right with the rest of his team. And, maybe it's something to do with that. Maybe he's just not sure. Like his instinct is to maybe take off a little bit more, but instead it's like he's going to do that, but then he's delivering a pass, and by then, the pass is a little bit slower, and it's not one thing nor the other. So maybe that's what has to be worked out. I'm not sure. I'd really have to study the tape. You'd probably have to be talking to him about what his thought processes are. You'd have to know what BA has been saying to him that he wants from him. It's what we do know is it just hasn't been working as we'd hoped it would. It hasn't been disastrous, but it hasn't been a positive.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the main thing. It just hasn't turned into a positive. But mate, we should probably now jump into our tips for this week. So, yeah, what's your scoreline?
This is one where I'm going to, as always, or almost always, I'm going to tip Parramatta, but with a real caveat that this is going to be a hard one. And I've been tipping for big wins, and I just can't do that this week. No Mitch. Raiders playing a brand of football that is so disruptive to the Eels in any given week, but especially when they're struggling to chase the collisions and win on physicality. So I will go for the Eels to win, but in a relatively tight affair, or maybe 20 points to 18, a real nail biter.
Yeah, I'm going to go for. I can't avoid going for high scoring. Close but high scoring. Eels 36-30.
Ooh. I don't know which one's going to be worse for the heart and soul. Gosh.
I just don't have the confidence in the defence.
Well, I'm concerned that if the Eels win, it's going to be a tight one. But if the Raiders get ahead, they could really pile on the points.
Yeah. First try scorer?
Ooh. Mike Acevo made a lot of sense last week, and neither of us tipped him. But it's going to be interesting to see because no Mitchell Moses. If they play with the high hand Dylan Brown, you'd tip someone down the left edge. So Sevo's a fair shout, but maybe Bowie Simonson.
Oh, you've just stolen my thunder, mate. I'm going for the backing the player playing against his old team to get the first try scorer.
Mm-hmm.
So Bailey Simonson, and your best on field.
I know a lot of people are looking at Dylan Brown. I expect him to build on what happened last week. But again, he almost seems like the obvious answer here. So, I mean, Matter's also a cheating answer too. So, a player, maybe Bryce Cartwright. I think in the absence of Moses, he might help create some of our best defensive play through the right edge in the middle.
Mate, I hinted at it before. I'm expecting a big return to form from Junior Paulo with a point to prove to critics, and also up against some of his old teammates. Okay, well, mate, I think we're just about wrapped up. Just that other reminder again that we'll see you down in Jack's Bar and Grill at Parramatta Leagues Club on Saturday night. So come and join us to cheer on the team down there. And again, a thanks to our sponsors, Big Swing Golf, Northmead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan, and Parramatta for their support and making it possible for us to deliver the content that we do on the Cumberland Throw. Any last words, mate?
Well, I'll see you tomorrow, mate. Looking forward to bagging a few wins against the Canberra Raiders.
Yeah, go you Eels.